Terrorist murder most foul and on a grand scale, and murder carried out against those who were prostrating themselves in prayer, in submission, who were worshipping God in their own way in leafy Christchurch in very leafy New Zealand. The perpetrator was a white supremacist, white nationalist, neo-Nazi. All of his manifesto, from the hailing of Donald Trump as the great white nationalist role model, through the icons of neo-Nazism that he was saluting and quoting with approbation in his obscene so-called manifesto, to the vile hate written on the magazines of the weapons with which he murdered in cold blood men, women, and children, unarmed, defenseless, returning again and again to the mass of bodies and finishing them off with absolute hate, ice cold, running through his veins. He didn't even kill himself at the end of it. Neither did he risk being killed by the police who were responding. He wanted to take his day in court, as Anders Breivik in Norway had done before him. He wanted to give the Nazi salutes and hail the vile poison of white supremacism for one last hurrah in the courts. And he will serve, of course, the rest of his life behind bars, but he will not be executed in cold blood in the way he executed all those people in the mosques today. And there were more than one of them. There was more than one mosque attacked. There are 4 people under arrest. And so there was a cell of Nazis operating in New Zealand. And the police and the intelligence services apparently knew nothing of them. Now, that might or might not be true, and I'm going to explore both options. But I want to remind you, I didn't do it to Dan Wootton's face, because I could tell, as a New Zealander, he was very upset, and I didn't want further to distress him. But there's nothing naive about the New Zealand security services. As a matter of fact, the New Zealand security services, like the Australians, are part of what's called the Five Eyes, 5 white Anglo-Saxon countries who cooperate in the tightest possible manner. Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. 5 white Anglo-Saxon countries. Their intelligence services act as one. And so, if there was a Nazi cell operating in New Zealand, there is no excuse for the New Zealand security services failing to keep tabs on them. And if they didn't know of their existence, that could be a further vindication of what I have long claimed is the problem. I just finished reading a wonderful book by Tim Tate, a guest often on this show, about Britain's Nazi 5th column in the 1930s and indeed into the 1940s, right up until the end of the war. And Tim demonstrates how all over London, all over England, and in Scotland, and in Ireland, there were cells of self-consciously Nazi operators, a real 5th column, and the British Security Service knew nothing about them, and when they did know something about them, they regarded them as a lesser evil, or maybe even a potential ally in their real target, which was the Communist Party and the communist movement. The same thing is happening today. So fixated are our security services on the very real threat of Islamist fanatic terrorism that they do not have their eye on the ball of far-right terrorist extremism. That's why one of them, I won't even say his name, I could only spit upon it, murdered poor Joe Cox, the Member of Parliament, just a couple of years ago. That's why, I'm not even going to name them, several British Nazi organisations have finally had to be proscribed. That's why people are now serving prison sentences, including serving British soldiers who were members of Nazi cells. Breivik in the United States, in Canada, all over this white Anglo-Saxon world, there are far-right, neo-Nazi, full-on Nazi terrorists lurking and waiting to strike against defenceless men, women and children in mosques, at schools, in the streets, around both. And so our security services, and I've said many times, I say it again, a lot of people in the left don't like it, but never mind. We need a security service. We need a properly funded, resourced, staffed security service. But it needs to be accountable and it needs to be colour-blind. It needs to treat every threat to the security of the realm and the people as equally, dastardly. And when that goes awry, we have the kind of events that we saw in New Zealand, or woke up to in New Zealand this morning. I don't need to tell you, I hope, that amongst the Muslims in Britain, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, all of which have been attacked, all of them, over these last few years, families are in fear. They are God-fearing people, but they are in fear of us. They are in fear of people like me, white people with blue eyes, who don't accompany them in prayer. This is a very grave situation, not just because it speaks to who we are, but because I ask you this question: how many Muslims do you think were radicalized by the events in New Zealand? How many new fanatics, how many new potential terrorists do you think will emerge in time from the footage that certain newspapers in Britain, two I know of, the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror, there may be others, I swear I know of no others, who allowed people as clickbait to click on not pornography, warnography, the most obscene snuff movie of innocent people being killed in real time, in cold blood. Newspapers in Britain were allowing their readers to click on their news sites. Do you think many Muslims looked? And if they did, what do you think they were feeling at the end of it? So I'm not walking here as some kind of liberal, because I'm not a liberal. I'm asking you not necessarily to feel the pain in your hearts that the Muslims are feeling right now. I'm asking you to pay attention to your own interests, the safety of yourself and your children, because we've already paid far too high a price for the Muslims hitherto fanaticized, extremized, radicalized, and we don't need more. And that's why the response now has to be a serious one. All these hate preachers that are given platforms, Melanie Phillips, Katie Hopkins, all these people Tommy Robinson, spewing out their hatred, indiscriminate hatred of Muslims, their religion, their way of life. All these newspapers, I could show you the front page collage if you like. Whether it's at the cheap end of the market or the fur coat end of the market, that daily parade, their contempt for and hatred of Muslims are radicalizing people. They're making people so angry that some of them are lured onto the rocks of terrorism, blood, and death. The death cult of ISIS and Al-Qaeda didn't emerge out of nowhere. It emerged out of real things, real lived experiences of war, of occupation, of hatred and bigotry, spewing out daily across the Western media, from the mouths of Western politicians. Think about it. It's really not rocket science. You don't have to be Einstein to work out. This act of terrorism was not carried out by you. It wasn't carried out in your name. But just as these Muslims in New Zealand paid the price of a hatred born of crimes committed by other Muslims in other parts of the world, so you, me, might suffer the blowback, the backlash that will be produced by this kind of murder and mayhem. It wasn't the only evil in the week. As I've said to you before, for deeply personal reasons, I feel the cut of every allegation of sexual abuse of children. I knew that Cyril Smith, when I was sitting in Parliament with him, was a wrong one. But I didn't have evidence. But somebody called Lord Steele, a lord, sitting in the British Parliament, admitted at the child sex abuse inquiry in Parliament this week that Cyril Smith confessed to him that he had been sexually abusing children. And Steele did nothing about it. In fact, he did worse than nothing about it. 7 years later, he recommended to Her Majesty the Queen that the same Cyril Smith, whom he knew to be a child rapist, should be elevated to being a knight of the realm. Just think about that. 7 years after Smith confessed to him, he recommended him for a knighthood. A knighthood that was given in all innocence by the Queen. Now, the Liberal Democrats very promptly, and I commend them for it, it was Dr. Sir Vince Cable's last act as leader of the Liberal Democrats, has suspended David Steele from the Liberal Democrat Party. But that's not enough. How can he continue to sit in Parliament when from his own mouth in front of the inquiry this week, he told us, without a scintilla of shame, by the way, absolute insouciance, doesn't appear to know what all the kerfuffle is about. He told us that a member of Parliament told him he'd been sexually abusing children, and he did nothing about it until he recommended him for a peerage 7 years later. There's not much time for me to tell you that we'll also be discussing Brexit, because in a way, There's really not much more for me to say on that, other than what I said last week. And I'll sum it up this way. Today, the British Parliament is an Augean stable, swilling with filth, swilling with betrayal, treachery. The British Parliament has betrayed the British people. And until the British people sweep them away and change that Parliament, it looks like we're locked in to the European Union for an indeterminate amount of time. We're talking about the extraordinary, foul terrorist attack in Christchurch in New Zealand upon not one but two mosques, killing 50 people so far, with several still critically wounded. Expect that death toll to rise. The principal shooter has been apprehended and will appear in court, I think, during the course of this show, and we'll be talking to our news people out there about that. We're looking at the swamp of anti-Muslim rhetoric, propaganda, and wickedness that has led to this, that has radicalized, fanaticized, extremized this Australian resident who, with a huge armory of guns and bombs, attacked these two mosques today. We're asking what lessons will be learned by the security services about the danger to all of us of far-right extremism, neo-Nazi extremism in many cases. We're talking about Brexit in this second hour and what it means, of course, for every aspect of our society, including our defence and intelligence. And we'll be talking to two expert guests, David Ellis, Director of the Strategic Defence Initiatives UK, on what our security profile will be if and when we ever do leave the European Union, and talking to Professor Alan Sked, Emeritus Professor of International History at LSE, the London School of Economics. And we'll be talking, of course, to you, 0344 499 1000. Let's talk to David Ellis, first of all. David, thanks for joining us.
Sure, thank you very much indeed, George. It's a pleasure to be on with you and talking about these issues.
Thank you. Now, let's assume, it's not a safe assumption, but let's assume we leave the European Union, now not on the 29th of March, as was promised literally hundreds of times by the government, but at some point in the near or middle distance, we leave the European Union. Are we then entirely reliant on ourselves for security and defence?
It's a terrific question. Let's go from two perspectives. From an engineering perspective, as an ex-engineer, assumptions are the mother of all mistakes. But more importantly, on this issue, the principal and primary political spin that's been used to pitch EU Defence Union and the agreements for effectively the MODs, the EU MOD in security and defence have already been agreed and established. So all of the step changes that are taking place have happened outside of Brexit, outside of the Brexit debate, either remain or leave, and outside of any of the party political avatars in Parliament. So the majority of all of this security work, and fortunately for us, Theresa May uses a kind of all-encompassing reference for this. When Theresa May says security, that encompasses all defence and security under Defence Union, which is single-point command and control of all defence and security services in the EU zone. So that will include policy, internal, external, capital and operational budgets, the lot, lock, stock and barrel. So all of these agreements are already in the EU pantheon, which the defence union, which they've put a beautiful diagram out with 8 pillars that support the defence union, and it has to have all of the 8 pillars, from bilateral defence agreements already in place, from MPPC, CSDP, and all of the dreadful EU acronyms that they use, all the way over to NATO. So in terms of what will change in Brexit, absolutely nothing, because none of this is included in the Brexit debate at all. And the MPs don't seem to be, no matter how hard anybody has tried to push them, wish to talk about it. It's almost as if it's been a pre-agreed arrangement. So we've very recently just caught Tony Blair at the EU, at a Munich Defence and Security Conference, claiming ownership of EU Defence Union, which obviously encompasses all of the security.
That includes the intelligence services too, then? Yes,
it's single point command of all of it, everything, internal, external, police, security, secret intelligence services, SAS, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, and dare I say it, I think that probably they're looking, I mean, we're even getting chatter coming out of the German government now saying that they've got eyes on aircraft carriers, and who knows? My next question is, does that include nuclear deterrent as well? But going back to the security thing, that really none of this is affected by Brexit because it's already pre-agreed. And that's really the contradiction and the anathema that we're seeing politically, where surely if we were leaving the EU, you would think that would include your security services and your military, i.e. for Britain, Her Majesty's Armed Services. No, they are already committed into EU Defence Union.
That's fascinating. And that's separate from the issue of a European army.
No. Well, that's the first thing, George, is that it's not a European army. That's a real serious propaganda term that needs debunking. What we're dealing with is, as Macron and one or two others have referred to as defence communes, defence union, but it encompasses everything in one envelope.
Okay. Including the nuclear weapons?
Well,
are our nuclear weapons under the control of European countries?
We've spent a huge amount of effort in trying to get to the bottom of this, because obviously you're into, very high-level government activity when you're talking about nuclear deterrence. So fortunately, we've got a very pro-Brexit admiral called Admiral Roger Lane Nott, who used to run Polaris as a flag admiral and took Trident out on its commissioning. So he's a real Democrat. He's very pro that, your armed services need to answer to Parliament, and they don't want to really be answering to the EU, which is currently what the status is. Now, in terms of the nuclear...
Who knew? Not many people knew that. I was nearly 30 years in Parliament and I didn't know that.
Well, this is a lot. I mean, from the research that we've got, and we've got a lot of people looking at it now, we're seeing a very long-term agenda to get and obtain defence union. Now, obviously, let's look down the other end of the telescope, George. If you wanted to pitch politically in the 50s and 60s and 70s to the British public at the ballot box going into defence union, what do you think the British public would have said?
They would have said no.
Yeah, correct. That's absolutely right. So we're now at the point of Brexit, and actually this has been agreed by, the process started under Tony Blair, by his own admission, with Jacques Chirac in Lisbon in 1998, formally. Now, I can add an anecdotal in there. When I met privately with Lord Tebbit at the start of the Vote Leave campaign, because Vote Leave wouldn't go anywhere near this issue. Obviously there are huge sums of money involved and the control of the capital and operational budgets and procurement budgets and so forth. It's a huge amount of money.
Of course.
So when I met with Lord Tebbit, why aren't Vote Leave talking about this? He said, well, I can come in it from one angle, that Maggie Thatcher was asked for defence union by Jacques Delors in 1984. So it's quite a long-term objective. Now, obviously, if you'd gone to the British electorate in 1984 to post the Falklands and asked to go into defence union with France and Germany, it would have been an uproar. It would have been political. Fundamentally, the middle ground in Britain would have regaled severely at the ballot box. So it's not been pitched. It's been kept in the dark. And this is the biggest problem. And I think this is one of the big things we've got to do in order to get some sense of Brexit and what really means to come back under democratic sovereignty is that surely we need to leave with our defence and security services under Parliament, not under the EU. Now,
well, quite. I mean, that is axiomatic,
correct.
without doubt. That's not to say we don't want to cooperate, do we? We're still in NATO, for better or worse. From my point of view, it's worse. But so we're still committed to, defend Gibraltar if someone attacks it. We are still a part of NATO's military and political command. So why do we need to be under the control of Juncker and Barnier?
Well, there's two aspects to that. I mean, obviously, firstly, we see this continually with MPs when we've lobbied them, is they default to NATO. And, of course, NATO is a very different operating system. It's a collection of sovereign nations in a defence collective. Now, EU Defence Union is nothing like that. It's single point command and control from the EU. And I think if we can just agree that the EU is a tyrannical operating system, it's not democratic at all.
Without doubt, in my opinion, yeah.
We're now seeing Macron and one or two others over there talking about it being an empire. And, of course, you're now talking about an armed empire.
Yeah.
Now, we've got, just to sort of throw some substance to that, we've got the head of EU intelligence, Francois Fischer, on a recording saying that Britain will not be leaving as far as defence and security is concerned, and that may be a secret, and then you will not leave. So this is coming from the EU end. We're seeing Germany tweet about defence union, but we're seeing silence from our own MPs on this issue. So there's the contradiction. But we're already seeing NATO taking orders from the EU, i.e. taking a subcontracting job from the EU in defence, and that's come direct from a former Trident admiral. So I know that that's a valid source.
Yeah. Well, that's very, very interesting indeed.
I mean, we can dice up whether you want nuclear weapons or not in a separate argument and a separate debate. But at the moment, looking towards, do we really want MI5, MI6?
Oh, we can't have that. This is an important democratic issues you're raising here. If we are to be a self-governing sovereign state, we must govern our own intelligence services and our own armed forces and their assets, including their nuclear ones.
Correct. 100% agree, George. And this is the one thing, is we've seen the assets sold short, dreadfully short, under these so-called defence cuts that were pitched in 2010 by Hammond and Cameron and co. And we can go back further because obviously they've been cutting for quite some time. But they're not cuts. It's a process of military unification. We're selling short the family silver and the national assets of carrier jump jets and HMS Ark Royal and all whatever else you want to put into the hat, and taking out the middle ground of 20-year serving servicemen and servicewomen.
No, exactly. Yeah. Look, my last question, David, because I'm grateful for your time. It's Friday night after all. I heard a woman on talk radio with my colleague Mike Graham, and she was perfectly serious. She said we need to stay in the European Union because who's going to defend us? Well, I immediately thought about the might of Slovenia and Slovakia and so on, and not to mention others, bigger powers. And she said, what if the Chinese invade the Isle of Wight? Who's going to defend them? Of course, the answer to that for the moment is NATO, even if the Chinese had ever heard of the Isle of Wight. But there is a lot of this misinformation, disinformation around, isn't there? That you leave Brexit, you're going to be prey to invasion, to subversion, to organised crime, all the things that we're not now at the moment, of course.
Well, I mean, we're in essence talking about Project Fear, aren't we? And we come back to sort of status. Who's actually attacking us? The folly has been the nonsense appertaining to the Cold War and a lack of understanding there. It's certainly been a trend for 100 years to pit Russia as the enemy in order to mitigate all of these arguments and pitch them politically.
Yeah.
But you very important question just before, George, and you asked about why. Now, the reason that the EU requires defence union is so that it can tax. It will trigger an EU treasury and full monetary union, and it will tax. Now, they've already going to hijack the NATO sort of budget principle of 2%. So if you said 2% of the GDP of the entire EU zone, of sort of 16 trillion, it gives you a sort of idea of the sum of money involved in the defence union budget that they would ultimately desire. I mean, they're going to work their way to it. It's a bureaucratic elephant. We all understand that. It's going to take some time to do it and pull it off. But nonetheless, it's a huge amount of money. Well, of course, the EU are not going to tax the citizens in the EU at 2%. The taxation will be far higher, so there will be a net yield. So those are the impacts. That's going to be the impact on the people in Europe. It's a pan-European problem, of course. It's not just British.
Well, David, I hope you'll come back at a later date so we could talk more on the EU Defence Directive. For now, I'm really grateful to you. Thanks very much for your time and your expertise. That's David Ellis. Yeet, Pray, Love says, Theresa May states, we must stop white supremacists from destroying our values. But if anything, her time as Home Secretary and her go-home vans demonstrate that white supremacists do not oppose her values, but rather violently uphold them. David Leviscont says, our MPs are a total disgrace. I guess power we gave to them has not been respected. These ignorant MPs are risking the tearing up of the fabric of our democracy. Shame on them. And Joe says, I've been waiting for the Prime Minister to turn up in a crash helmet and jumpsuit. She's pulled more stunts than Evel Knievel over Brexit. And Mark in Newcastle says, since I've been betrayed by MPs from both the Labour and Conservative Party, I will remember this when it comes to my vote at the ballot box. We need to wipe both parties out now for this betrayal, and votes are our only weapon. Now, let me take another call. This one from Carl in Greater Manchester. Carl, welcome to the show.
Hi, George.
Hi.
All right, mate.
Oh, good, sir.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, good to hear that, Paul. Yeah, it's just I was just saying to the young lady I was speaking to on the reception there, I'm just so irritated by this bloke over in New Zealand who's being like kind of labelled a terrorist, like it's some kind of badge of honour or something. In my book, mate, he's a coward. The bloke is just simply a coward.
If you go in with multiple automatic weapons and murder 50 unarmed people, men, women and children, you're definitely a coward.
Yep, correct. Absolutely right. That's what it needs hanging on him, a badge round his head when he's up in
He didn't
court
even
there.
have the guts to kill himself at the end of the spree.
No, I didn't want to get into that, George, but that isn't the first person who's done that. We had a gentleman somewhere around Manchester way who did exactly the same as that with two young police officers, killed them and then ran down to the police station afterwards, handed himself in, I believe. Wow. Anyway, you know what I mean? So just cowards, mate. That's all they are.
But they're not. But they're acting. I mean, terrorism is inflicting suffering on other people for political purposes, and his purposes were clearly political. We're not talking about the lone wolf because there was 4 of them. We're not talking about mental illness because he wrote a perfectly cogent and vile, hate-filled Nazi manifesto immediately prior to doing it. He's been planning it for 2 years and the specifics for 3 months. So this is a clear terrorist attack. That doesn't mean he's not a coward, but it's a terrorist attack.
Yes. It's just, I think, people who do attacks like that, picking on, kids as well and everything. And it's just a coward's way of going about things. Simple.
You're right.
And that's what they need labelling as. They don't need, this in the newspapers and on the news about all the terrorists. They just need to be labelled as cowards.
Carl, thanks for your call and your wisdom. David is in Nottingham. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, David.
Hi, George.
Hi.
George, with this Brexit, do you know, if just one country vetoes the extension, what does that mean?
That means we leave on the 29th on WTO terms. I'm praying for some small EU country that's felt slighted by the British.
Hungary and Italy are going to veto the extension.
Well, I'm not sure that they will, but if they do, sing hallelujah, because then we'll be leaving in just a few days' time on WTO terms. We don't have to pay £49 billion to the EU as a divorce bill, and we'll be perfectly fine. So I'm hoping that, but I really don't have much faith that that will happen, Dave.
So they couldn't reverse. But I suppose you haven't got enough time to do that.
No, they don't. No, they don't. This would have to happen at the European Council next week.
David Ellis were brilliant, George. I never knew that our armed services had been signed over to the EU.
Well, not only did you not know it, neither did I, David. And I was near 30 years as an MP.
Yeah. Maybe nowadays when we sign up for Queen and Country, we should just sign up for the EU and
sign up to Juncker and Barnier. What could possibly go wrong?
It's crazy.
Now, they can have their European army if they like. Good luck. I don't think it'll be much of an army, to be perfectly frank. And as I've said before, again, a lot of people don't like it, but it's my view. We don't have a good experience with European armies.
No, I agree.
Either the ones we fought or the ones that were fighting alongside us.
Yeah, totally.
Insofar as they fought, most of them at all. David.
Yeah. We
last word to you.
All France's ships, didn't we, in the Second World War, when we could have used them to fight against the Germans?
Yeah, didn't we scuttle them at Abu Qir?
Yeah. What a stupid thing that's to do.
Yeah. Well,
No,
David,
you,
as I say, they're entitled to. They can do what they like. We wish them well. We will take no hostile or unfriendly or unneighbourly action against them, and we expect them not to do against us. It's not that we're, disappearing out of Europe. We are European. We live in the European continent, but we are off the coast of that continent, and we have historically determined that the best policy for us is to be independent of the European continent, only intervening when some people were trying to unite Europe, like Adolf Hitler.
Do you think they're trying to strip us of nationality, George?
No, I think we represent a challenge to the EU project, but we're not the only challenge. No. This is the point I tried to make to the man from Le Figaro on Crosstalk on RT today, which was earlier referred to. They talk as if the EU was popular in Europe. It is wildly unpopular.
Yeah,
it is hated. Macron himself told us when he came here to London that if there was a referendum in France, the French would vote to leave it.
Yeah.
And then he added, that's why I won't give them a referendum. How democratic is that? How arrogant is that?
Well, yeah.
So,
how many referendums have had and they've just overturned them?
Quite, and that's what they're trying to do with us. And they may succeed, David.
It's the trademark, isn't it?
Yeah, they may succeed. They've done it. They've done it in Italy, done it in France, done it in Ireland.
If you do that,
yeah, just force you to vote until you vote the right way, mate.
Yeah, we're all thick.
All right, thank you very much,
you,
David, in Nottingham, for that call. Terry Eaton says the whole of Parliament has betrayed the electorate. The present shower, no, I've done that one. No, I haven't. The present shower of law graduates on all sides of the House don't care about us. Only the gravy train that keeps on running, unlike the passenger trains that don't. What a very good point, Terry. Charlie Fay Ross, hi gorgeous. This unelectable Labour Party is condemning Scotland and the other three nations to a generation of Tory governments. To quote Ian Blackford, oh dear, a shiver ran along the Labour front bench and couldn't find a spine to run up. Fortunately, the sovereign people of Scotland have a get-out clause. You're welcome to join us, George. Well, get ahead with it, Charlie. What are you waiting for? Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Why don't you call a referendum? Why do you keep threatening us with it? Why don't you call another referendum? I'll tell you why. Because you know you'd lose. Mary Mo says, people should not pass the terrorist video around online. It is basically giving the killer what he wanted, his notoriety for murdering unarmed, unsuspecting, innocent men, women and children, so he and others could gloat over it. Amen. Fra Hughes says the darling buds of May could well blossom this spring, as her deal could very well finally be endorsed in a slightly watered-down form. As the reality sinks in, it's the only game in town, deal or no deal, a simple choice. DUP to end its opposition, perhaps? Well, I'm going to talk to Professor Alan Sked about just that in a few minutes, Fra. Thanks for teeing it up. Let's hear from Nicola in Swindon.
Good evening to you, George.
Evening, Nicola.
Good evening. I'd like to talk to you about Brexit. There's a couple of things that sort of bother me, but if we get this extension, which might be up to 2 years, as you say, it means we've almost wasted a whole term of Parliament dealing with one issue, which they all said would be simple at the beginning, didn't they?
Yeah, well, it should have been simple. It could have been just a simple email on day one, as I called for on this very station.
We've got nowhere. Liam Fox has got hardly anywhere with any new trade deals with other countries. Or, well, that's the impression I'm getting anyway.
But you don't need trade deals to trade with people. Most people don't have trade deals with most other people.
No, they don't. And
that's what the WTO is for.
Yeah, but we're talking of cutting down some duty to other people, undercutting things. So we're almost going to be like a sort of bargain basement country if
certainly there are lots of Tories who have that vision of Britain. It goes without saying I don't, and Jeremy Corbyn doesn't, and I think the majority of the British people don't.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm worried about is, I went to the chemist today to get something, and they said, we haven't been able to get that item since the beginning of the year, and they tell us we won't be able to get it out of it till the summer. And I said, is it just that item? They said, no, it's lots of items this year. They said it's almost as if these items are being stockpiled, but not for the likes of you or me, but being stockpiled in case we can't get the medicines into the country, but not for the man in the street, but for other people probably. And that worried me a little bit because what are we stockpiling?
I hope we're stockpiling, but I hope we don't need to stockpile.
Yeah.
We have a gigantic pharmaceutical industry here in Britain. If they don't want to make the medicines that we need and sell it to us, well, we should bring them back into public ownership as they once were. Nicola, thanks for that call. Andrew, so if I understand your guess correctly, we can never leave the EU and the whole Brexit business has been a hollow farce. Well, not quite, Andrew, but it does seem a bit like Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. How is it possible, says unsociable socialist, to defeat Islamophobia when racists are not only told by the Western media it's okay to hate Muslims, but it's actually been policy for decades of Western governments to dehumanize and murder Muslims across the world. And an unnamed texter says, democracy is now dead. All those in Parliament have killed it. Never vote again. And I voted to remain. And John says, please, one of 27 EU members, do not approve the leave date extension. No more publicly funded 5-star trips for Theresa Mayhem. There's all kinds of bad news on all kinds of fronts. And one of those is Brexit. I mentioned twice that I was on Crosstalk on RT earlier today. One of the guests that was on with me, but in a different studio, was Professor Alan Sked, who is the Emeritus Professor of International History at the London School of Economics. That's no mean title, no mean university. We didn't get much time, Professor, to talk to each other because our French interlocutor shouted over both of us throughout. So I thought I'd bring you on the radio show so we could have more time to knock a few things around between us. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now,
yes, we didn't get to see each other, yes.
Neither see nor hear, really, because our Latin, as he described himself, our Latin colleague had no real appreciation of the rules of debate, but leave that aside. Here's my point, I think, Professor. It's in play. Money talks, it swears, as Bob Dylan said, and money's talking with the DUP. The DUP bring with them a significant part of the Jacob Rees-Mogg-led ERG. Is it really possible that the Theresa May deal will go through at the third time of asking? And why is that bad news, as I believe it to be?
Well, Nigel Dodds of the DUP has denied that they're talking about money, but then Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, has been part of the negotiations.
Yeah. As Mandy Rice Davis once said, he would say that, wouldn't he?
Yes, yes. I think if there's no change on the backstop, and I don't think there can be any change on the backstop, the DUP would look extremely silly and embarrassed if it then decided to turn around and support May's deal. So I still suspect that they won't support it. The deal itself is dreadful, as you know. It makes us a kind of vassal state of the European Union for 2 years, subject to all its laws and regulations without any kind of control or representation. And then if the backstop is still there, it ties us to the customs union almost in perpetuity.
Yeah, and we can't leave the back. It's Hotel California, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I agree with you. I'd put it in different words. It is worse than remaining in the EU to leave the EU on Theresa May's deal.
Yes, but she's a Remain Prime Minister. I've got no idea what her initial vision was for Brexit, whether she's been ground down after that dreadful general election she triggered in 2017, lost her majority. But, I mean, her first statements, Lancaster House speech, seemed to be perfectly all right. But since the negotiations have started, she's retreated and basically caved into every European Commission demand. So we're in the situation we're in now, where we have this dreadful deal, and she seems to think it's wonderful.
Now, 17.4 million people voted for Brexit, the greatest number for anybody in British history. But isn't the fundamental problem, I say so because I highlighted it at the time in regular columns I was writing, that 17.4 million people didn't really have a parliamentary representative, or at least not one worth the salt. As I put it, I don't expect you necessarily to agree, but the Tory leaders of the Brexiteers, if you saw them coming down your street, you'd lock up your daughters and lock up your sons and your wife, and you wouldn't buy a second-hand lawnmower from them.
Yes, I totally agree. And the trouble was that the people voted absolutely sensibly to come out of the EU. But those in the campaign supporting Brexit had no official status. I mean, in government, the job of taking us out of the EU officially and through legislation was left to our government. David Cameron resigned. And then the government, after the bizarre backstabbing episode of Michael Gove and Boris, was left in the hands of Mrs. May, and a cabinet which was at least half, if not two-thirds, full of Remainers. So we had this bizarre outcome that Brexit was being negotiated by its enemies. And if there's a mess, then that's the real cause of it, because as Nick Timothy said, she probably just saw it as damage limitation. She probably still thinks, as the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, obviously does, that we would be better still remaining in the EU. So she's been grudgingly trying to get the most minimum Brexit deal that's possible, and she seems to be surprised that nobody on the Brexit side is actually impressed by it.
Now, someone raised this, a caller raised this just a minute or two ago, and we've both been saying this. If just one of the other 27 members of the EU vetoes any extension, we leave on the 29th on WTO terms. I'm actually earnestly praying for that, but how likely does that seem to you?
I don't know. I mean, I'm praying for it as well. In fact, I've sent a tweet to Matteo Salvini, the man who's running Italy just now, and asked him to vote against an extension. There are rumours that the Lithuanians, or perhaps the European Parliament, maybe even the Walloon Parliament, I don't know. I think the Europeans are very frustrated. They're saying that if she wants an extension, she must actually have a plan. Well, if the meaningful vote passes on the third time, then she'll have a plan, she'll be implementing it. But if that doesn't happen, and I'm still skeptical that she'll get it through, if that doesn't happen, then we don't know what possible plan she could put forward, because the House of Commons has ruled out a referendum. It's ruled out most things. It doesn't want to take us back into the EU. So unless they can get a cross-party deal on a customs union or a Norway solution, which again might happen, but at this stage doesn't look likely or probable, I don't know what she's going to ask for an extension for, in which case they might just say no. Or it may be that, time will just run out. There aren't very many days left when the House of Commons is sitting between now and the 29th. Remainers have to get their act together. Then, of course, the government has to react, because unless the government, not Parliament, actually changes
the law.
The law with the agreement of the EU, we leave on the 29th.
Now, it's of course possible that somebody will veto it. It's of course possible that we will get to the 29th and almost by default leave on WTO terms. But let's agree that it's more likely that there will be an extension, in which case, what extension? We'll come in a minute to what you would do with that time. But it's being said by the British Parliament that we want an extension till June the 30th. The European Parliament elections are slated for May the 26th. Will the next crop of MEPs be the shortest term of parliamentary service ever? They'll probably all get a year's wages anyway. Or will the government try and stop us actually voting in the European Parliament elections, even though we'll still be a member of the EU on the government's own position for another 5 weeks after those elections?
Well, it's all in the hands of lawyers, I think. The European Union is speaking with different voices. I think the consensus is that if we're still in, we have a right to take part in the elections for however short a period. It would be very silly. And of course, there'd be a huge pro-Brexit swing.
Yeah.
And it would be very embarrassing for the House of Commons and indeed for the European Union. So they might not give us a long extension. I think, I don't know, I would hope that if a deal fails, then the Labour Party might again put forward a motion of confidence. And I would think that a lot of the ERG and Tory MPs might be tempted to support it and bring down the government. And let us have a general election.
I saw a pig fly past the window there. I'm not sure that Turkey, to mix the animal metaphor, that turkeys ever vote for an early Christmas, but we'll see about that. If it's 2 years, Professor, which is what Macron and others have said it ought to be, what we're going to do during that 2 years? Isn't that just another 2 years in which the wholesale subversion of the public debate will be mounted by big moneyed interests here and abroad? And by the end of that 2 years, an exhausted people will probably slump towards remaining after all.
Well, it depends whether the European Union is still there in 2 years. Yeah. I mean, it could have an implosion economically because of the fragile nature of the euro just now. And, a lot of people are sensitive that if there's a recession, the Italian economic system will come under pressure, the banks will come under pressure, the bond markets will desert the euro, and that Italian banks followed by French and German banks might fall, and the whole thing might collapse. So 2 years is a very long time. I don't know what would actually happen. There would have to be some consensus in Parliament, which so far doesn't seem to be available. And I think the Tory party would split, and May would be forced out. And then there'd be a leadership election, depending on whether a Brexiteer, and I think only a Brexiteer could win the Tory leadership. Depending on that, things might change. But I certainly think the pressure for... I mean, you say Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, but a lot of the ERG people might be desperate enough to bring down the government to get rid of May in order to get a Tory Brexiteer as leader. And I don't think in the long run...
Oh, no, that could well happen. I mean, a vote of no confidence,
together.
As you know, doesn't automatically lead to a general election. A vote of no confidence could be followed by an emerging by special electoral rules of another Tory leader who could then persuade Her Majesty that they could command a majority in the House and then show it. It doesn't necessarily mean a general election, does it?
I think it would. I think under the circumstances, there'd be no such Tory around. The Tory party would just split almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, both parties, of course, are split. Tom Watson's the leader of one part of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the mass of the party membership in the country, but a tiny number of MPs. How do you calibrate the balance of opinion and power inside the Conservative Party? I mean, is it 50-50, would you say, roughly?
No, I think among the MPs it's probably it may be 50-50 or 60-40 in favour of Remain. Among the party members and voters, as far as we can see from opinion polls, the majority are definitely for no deal, and that goes for party members and party voters. I think that there must be enough of an incentive to the Tories looking at opinion polls which showed Jeremy Corbyn 10 points behind and TIG, not properly formed into a party with no organisation as such yet. There must be a huge incentive to have an election when TIG would probably be wiped out and the Labour Party would do very badly, particularly in the north of England, where it would be seen now definitely as betraying Brexit. So, I mean, I don't rule out...
And would Theresa May lead the Conservatives into that election?
Yes, that's a big question.
Because she already promised she wouldn't, but then she didn't expect it to be quite so soon.
She would resign before 2020, when the next general election is due, or 2022 rather.
Mm-hmm.
And but she didn't promise to rule out leading them in an election before
She'd
then.
need to get her voice back pretty quickly.
Well, I'm sure the Tory MPs would be sick at the thought of taking them into another election, but I don't think there'd be time for a leadership contest first. There might be, you never know.
And yet, Professor, I don't want to intrude into personal grief, but UKIP has become has drifted to the wildest shores of extremism and racism and hatred of Islam, Islamophobia, and all the things we were talking about earlier in the show. So where do these 17.4 million Brexit voters go?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. The Electoral Commission has just approved a new party I've set up called Prosper UK, the website being www.
I promise you I didn't know that when I asked this question.
prosperuk.party. No, I know you didn't. www.prosperuk.party. And we're coming out, we've got some very intelligent people behind us who are coming out with new policies for a regeneration of post-Brexit Britain. And I hope that we'll be in a position, and the BBC will ignore us, of course, but we'll end up having our own communications network, and we'll try and break through. I think you're slightly hard on UKIP. I mean, I don't agree with Jared Batten's view of Islam being a death cult or anything like that. And I don't know enough about Tommy Robinson to say whether he's been, given too severe a treatment by the media. I think you may have suffered the same sort of thing in the past. But to say that UKIP is way out in the very greatest extremes, I think is an exaggeration. It has moved to the right, and it is, instead of talking about mainstream politics and Brexit, in fact, you never hear any UKIP views on Brexit during the debate. But instead of that, you're right, it has been concentrating too much on Islam.
Professor Alan Sked, Emeritus Professor of International History at the London School of Economics. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. John says, no, I've done that one. He's begging somebody in the 27 to veto the British delay. I can't see it myself. The power of the bureaucracy would be too much. We're talking the atrocity, terrorist atrocity that took place in Christchurch and what led to it, who's responsible for it, and why weren't they headed off before they could commit such a horrific mass murder of 50 people and rising, I'll warrant. And we're talking about defence and Britain's security, policing, intelligence, its military posture, its military alliances, if, and it's a big if, we ever leave the European Union. David Leviscont says Theresa May's deal represents this. There is your prison for eternity. Here is your key to freedom. Be sure to destroy it and go into your prison. I don't know any word to describe this. Even treason doesn't come close. Well, you know my view. I believe that the Parliament has betrayed the people. Parliament gave the British people the right to choose whether or not we left or remained in the European Union. They promised to abide by the result, and they have not. Indeed, the last 3 years have been one catalogue of deception, of double-dealing, and of, ultimately, betrayal. Not everyone involved is a deceiver and a double-dealer, but most of them are. Some of them are just incompetent clowns. And that was the original sin. That was the original problem. When the British Parliament, after the referendum, was elected in 2017, it did not contain those that it once would have, that would champion the cause of Brexit that the majority had voted for, and were incapable of adumbrating a vision of what Britain after Brexit could be like. Which brings me to the melancholy anniversary of the 5th anniversary of the Right Honourable Tony Benn, who passed away 5 years ago this weekend. And this loss, all losses are hard to bear, especially for people that you were close to, and I was exceedingly close to Mr. Benn from the 1970s until the day of his funeral. Indeed, I feel as if he is my leader until now. But can you just imagine of Mr. Benn at the height of his powers, had led the Brexit campaign and led Britain through this process and painted a vision of what Britain could be? Can you just imagine that? If you can, as I can, then you will know how sad, sorry I am feeling that he's no longer with us. Instead, we've got Liam Fox and Boris Johnson and somebody called Mark François. Here's Donald in Inverness, always worth hearing. Donald, welcome back.
Welcome, George.
Thank you.
As usual, another informative programme. It's becoming essential listening now.
Thank you.
And I've just heard the second new party launch on the mother of all.
Yes, that came as a surprise.
Yes, indeed, and I've looked on the website and already. George,
He sounds Scottish to me, Donald.
Sorry?
He sounds Scottish to me, is he?
Alan Sked?
Yes.
Yes, it says here, this will interest you, it says here that he was the chairman of Glasgow University Liberal Club way back.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, things changed since then.
Of course.
But
so have the Liberals, of course.
Cable was also in Glasgow, you'll remember. And you'll remember, of course, that you ousted Roy Jenkins.
Indeed, I remember it fondly.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you, I mean, that maybe we don't have time for that one, George. Can I ask you another time what were the issues that succeeded on that occasion? Because that's where I was at that time.
Yeah. Well, I would have said that it was young versus old. It was real Labour versus Gatescalite 1950s Labour. It was hunger against complacency. Roy Jenkins had been a very important man for a very long time, and it showed. As I've said before, I knew I was going to win when on a teeming wet Sunday down Byres Road came a Ford motor car with a sunroof opened and the very ample form of Roy Jenkins sticking out through the sunroof, waving at non-existent electors on first floor windows. And at that point I knew that a man such as he, reduced to that, was definitely doomed.
Anyway, you sent him running.
I sent him to the House of Lords, for which he thanked me later.
Yes, that's right. He got his ticket.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, it's another Liberal I'm phoning about tonight,
yes.
George. I'm phoning about what you mentioned at the beginning.
David Steele.
About Cyril Smith.
Cyril Smith, yeah.
And David Steele.
Yeah.
Now, you may remember last year there was a documentary, a very English scandal.
Yes, with
about
Jeremy Thorpe.
Thorpe's trial. Now, there were 2 points that I can remember from that programme, and I'm hoping that you can fill in some thoughts on that for my benefit and the benefit of your listeners. Mm-hmm. The first one is that it's a hazy memory, but in that programme, in that documentary, David Steele was mentioned, and his investigation, quote unquote, into Jeremy Thorpe. And I felt from the programme itself that this had been a whitewash at that time. And of course his attitude now in the Cyril Smith incident suggests that he's quite capable of turning a blind eye to inconvenient truths. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping that if you've got any extra stuff on that, you might give us the benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of that, and I'm thinking that Thorpe was in the 1970s. I don't know when Steele became a powerful figure in the Liberal Party as it then was. Maybe somebody through the glass can look that up now.
He became leader straight after Thorpe.
Yeah, of course, but he wasn't the leader, obviously, when Thorpe was committing crimes. Or being accused of committing crimes. And we now know, I think, beyond contradiction, that he did, in fact, commit those crimes. What I can tell you is about Cyril Smith. I was, from 1983, for more than a decade, closely involved with the magazine Private Eye. And so I knew everything about Cyril Smith. I knew that he was a reprehensible individual who had, I thought, credible allegations against him of paedophilia, of sexual assaults upon children, reduced, I may say, by David Steele in the CSA inquiry to the following words which simply take the breath away. That he had been accused of spanking some bare bottoms. When, of course, he was accused of much worse than that. But what kind of MP do you want who goes into an orphanage and spanks people's bare bottoms? Exactly. And the fact that he could say this with such insouciance when he told us that he knew the truth 7 years before nominating Cyril Smith for a knighthood. So, I'm looking for a criminal offence in this. I've called for his arrest. The Liberal Democrats have suspended him. That's good. The House of Lords must now suspend him from membership of the House of Lords. But I'm asking the Metropolitan Police, if a member of Parliament tells you that they have been sexually abusing children and you don't report it, moreover, not only do you not report it, you elevate that member of Parliament 7 years later, and you deceive the Queen that is a person of good character. You deceive I don't know if there was an honours committee at that time, but in any case, you're deceiving the Queen because it's her that bestows the knighthood. Isn't there a criminal offence in that? I find it difficult to believe that there isn't.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, but I don't know if he was an MP at the time. He said something about that, but that...
No, he wasn't. He was the mayor. He was the mayor of his town then, and that's Steele's get out. But that's not a get out, Donald. If I'm a member of Parliament in the lobby, and any other member of Parliament comes up to me and confesses to a serious crime against children.
Yes, I'm with you.
How can I say, well, I didn't report him because when he committed those crimes, he wasn't a member of Parliament?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But now, of course, it was a documentary, so it might not be absolutely accurate. But if I'm not mistaken, the whole point about that documentary, bringing in David Steele, going by memory, and your people can look it up.
Yeah, I'll need to watch it again, actually.
Yeah, he was asked to investigate. I mean, he was obviously asked in his capacity as leader of the new leader to investigate something. And but anyway, they can look at it. It's just to remind you about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he would appear at the very least. He would appear at the very least to have a highly relaxed view about his parliamentary colleagues' activities, even when those activities are criminal.
And his own responsibility and elastic conscience.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've known David Steele for a very, very long time. And I always found him a sanctimonious kind of minister in the manse. I mean, I don't know his religion, but I mean, he always struck me.
He was the son of a manse.
He's the son of a manse. There you go. That's what I'm trying to say. And for a sanctimonious man to be guilty on his own account of such a thing, it just beggars belief for me. Now, I have 4 young children. I have myself been a victim of such things myself whilst a child. It matters a lot to me, and it ought to matter a lot to everybody that we have parliamentarians, knights of the realm, involved in crimes, sexual crimes against children, other members of Parliament knowing about it and covering it up, doing nothing about it.
Yeah. There was something else that came from that programme, George, and I haven't heard anything about it. I think it said at the end, it said something like this, that the police were reopening some case because of the documentary.
Yeah, they did, but they then decided to take no further action, I think.
And there was another thing about the Director General of the BBC who had wanted to destroy the panorama documentary that wasn't shown at that time and was now being shown again. There was something about him he wanted to, and so I don't know. And it was just to refresh your memory about these.
Yeah, I'm going to watch it again, Donald. You've encouraged me to do that. Maybe we'll talk about it on another occasion. Thanks as always for a lovely call. Here's Gus in Glasgow. Go ahead, Gus.
Yes, hello, George. Nice to speak to you again.
And you, sir.
It was about the British parachute regiment are going to hold a demonstration march about the soldier that's going to get charged.
Soldier F.
Yes.
Who's going to hold the demonstration?
The veterans.
Veterans, yeah, because obviously serving soldiers are not allowed to have demonstrations.
They're not serving soldiers.
They're veterans, yeah. Where is that going to be, Gus?
It's in Derry.
That would be a very provocative thing to do. I'm not sure that you can be correct about that. Where did you see this, Gus?
I've read it. It was in the Derry News.
Really? Well, I'd be astounded if veterans of the parachute regiment were to hold a demonstration in Derry. Utterly astounded. That would be a provocation of incalculable consequences.
Yeah, well, that's what they were saying. There's going to be...
I'll tell you what I did learn from talk radio during the week, Gus, to my amazement, from the veteran and highly respected Irish journalist Eamon Malley, that Soldier F, and we can say this because we're not identifying him, Soldier F, who's going to be prosecuted for Bloody Sunday, was also the soldier, or one of them, who fired the fatal shots on the death of a rock in Gibraltar many years later. That's not being prosecuted, of course, but it is an extreme coincidence that the same Soldier F was involved, allegedly, according to the Crown, in killing unarmed demonstrators in Derry, and then a decade later killing unarmed Irish men and women in Gibraltar.
Yes.
How extraordinary.
The most...
And of course, the same regiment were involved in Ballymurphy before they went to Derry.
Yes, that's what I was going to say about the priest. And there was 42 or 43 bullets.
Well, I have visited the Ballymurphy scene of the crimes there, and a friend of mine, Sean Murray, whom I'm working with on the David Kelly film, he's our director. He made a wonderful documentary about Ballymurphy. Gus, thanks for the call. I need to take a break for some capitalist messages. Now, our correspondent in New Zealand is Rex Wilderstrom, and he is, Widerstrom, forgive me, Rex. He's a New Zealand journalist, he's a broadcaster, and he's reporting for us on what's happening in New Zealand. Rex, are you on the line?
I am, George. Hi.
Do forgive me for getting your name wrongly. Tell us, what are we expecting to hear from this court?
Well, it's difficult to say because there's the question mark over the other two people who remain in custody. The fourth person's been released. He apparently turned up with a gun intending to help the police rather unwisely. So he's probably been given a severe talking to and was let go this morning. There are still two other people in police interview rooms at the moment, and they're trying to work out their links to the main shooter and what role they played in the events of yesterday.
Were they New Zealanders, Rex?
Well,
or are they also Australian?
We don't know. This guy's been living in a house in Dunedin, which is now cordoned off, and neighbours have been moved out while police are going through that home. We are assuming that they were people that were perhaps cohabiting there with him, but we don't know anything else about them at all at the moment.
Now, will he at least be charged today?
He will inevitably, so that they can keep him longer, he will be charged with something. I would imagine, knowing the way the courts work, it would probably be something of a lower level, perhaps weapons charges, resisting arrest, because he had to be rammed off the road, that kind of thing. They haven't identified most of the bodies. As far as I know, there's only been one so far. So a murder charge would be difficult without names of victims and so forth.
Now, the fact that he, at least, is Australian, what impact is that likely to have on Australian-New Zealand relations? Is there any sign of tension on that?
Well, there's certainly tension as a result of the comments of one Senator, Fraser Anning, who indulged in a bit of victim blaming very, very early on, and of course has a history of inflammatory and racist statements, and New Zealanders have reacted very, very poorly indeed to that, as you'd expect. They're also a little bit sceptical, we have to say, of official Australian government avowals of sympathy, given the attitude of Australia to refugees and immigrants generally, and the fact that they're deporting hundreds of New Zealanders who have done nothing wrong other than to perhaps be a member of a bikie gang, but not committed any crime, or who committed crimes 20 or 30 years ago in Australia, served their time, and have now been told that they're not a good character and are being sent home. Some of those people were born in New Zealand and left as infants. So we're dealing with that at the moment. And in terms of relationships between the two countries, the two peoples, I don't think it'll have an effect on that. No, we know Australians to be good people.
Now, the security services have got some questions to answer, don't they? This man was living in plain sight in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. His social media activities were clear and threatening, and yet nobody picked it up.
No, he was not on any watch lists, and there have been a number of incidents where activists have been targeted by New Zealand police and security services because of their, I guess you could say, broadly left-wing activism. People who were protesting a recent arms industry conference in New Zealand are now commenting on Twitter about the treatment they received from police at the time, the surveillance, even the physical manhandling. And saying yet these people weren't under any observation whatsoever. The Prime Minister's acknowledged that and has asked for a report on that whole incident, and that will be received at Cabinet on Monday morning. She's moving very, very quickly to try and find out why this happened. Meantime, we've moved to a very high security alert, and she's also signalled that there will be some rapid changes to New Zealand's gun laws.
What are those gun laws, Rex?
Well, somebody said it's ironic that you cannot buy semi-automatic weapons in Australia since the Port Arthur massacre there some years ago now, and yet an Australian could come to New Zealand and buy those very, very same weapons here. You see in the paper advertisements for AK-47s and AR-15s. Unfortunately, New Zealand has a strong hunting lobby who are worried about crackdowns on guns, but they don't use those kinds of guns. But it's a bit of an NRA sort of mentality that.
Oh, really? I never would have guessed that. Everyone thinks you're all virtually Quakers.
Well, we are in terms of attitudes to people, but I know the gun lobby here do feel or say they feel that if weapons start being banned, it's the thin end of the wedge. And of course, that was advanced as an argument against doing it in Australia. And in fact, that hasn't happened at all. It won't happen here. You can still buy, single shot rifles and go hunting if that's your thing. It's certainly not mine.
No, it's not mine either, but automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons, this is disaster waiting to happen. Nobody needs an automatic to shoot rabbits.
No, exactly. And although we haven't had very many massacres in New Zealand, we have had a few, we haven't learned that lesson. And I think that's a lesson now that we have finally taken on board.
Rex, I'm deeply grateful to you. Thanks, my friend. Rex Widerstrom, the New Zealand journalist reporting for Talk Radio. I've got hundreds of pieces of written material. Mummy girl, Bev Steen, says that Professor Sked was about right. I only gave UKIP support because Labour and Tory wasn't bothered. I don't much like Batten, and it's a bit of a southern party. I'm in the northwest, so happy to support Brexit Party until we are out properly. That's the Nigel Farage vehicle. I await further and better particulars on that. David Leviscont says, Europe, we came to your rescue. We now need you to come to our rescue. Please set us free and veto any extension. Handsome Samson says the EU will whip the members into passing an extension on Article 50. And unlike May's whip, it will stick. I suspect you're right, Handsome. And Mark says the European Union don't want us to leave. They want our money. And Big Al says it does not matter where you are on this earth. It appears the terrorists have taken over. It's a sad world we live in, and we don't know the answer. Umar is in Rochdale. Let's hear from him. Umar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jordan. Nice to speak to you.
And you, sir?
Yeah, well, actually, funnily enough, listening to your show today, it's interesting that our only link to what you've spoken about today is Cyril Smith. And I just find it so typical that any time Rochdale's ever in the media, it's either grooming gangs or Cyril Smith or the likes of Simon Danchuk, who interestingly put out a book exposing Cyril Smith, but then himself was found to be sending texts to an underage teenage girl. which is, is hypocrisy at its finest. But actually, George,
you sure she was underage, Omar? I just need to clarify that. He was certainly in a scandal involving a very young girl. Yeah. I'm just not sure that she was actually underage.
Okay, I may be mistaken.
No, I've got to clear that up. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the reason I called George was obviously this New Zealand shooting that happened. And I, like yourself, had the misfortune to watch that video this morning.
Well, I kind of felt I had to watch it for my job, but I did call on others not to because it is utterly devastating.
Well, actually, George, it was sent to me without any context, so really I didn't know what to expect. But what really stood out to me was, as the man approached the mosque, he was greeted by one of the mosque goers, and he welcomed him with the
salam,
word, "Hello, brother." Yeah, precisely, yeah. And so he said to him, "Hello, brother," and then he proceeded to pull out a gun. It seems to be a semi-automatic shotgun and shoot him at point blank. Now, George, obviously, firstly, as a member of the human race, but then secondly, as a member of the Muslim community, watching this video, I felt despair. And, then I felt total helplessness that, people from my own community were being slaughtered in a place of worship, and I could do nothing about that. And, George, I'm only 20 years old, and, I don't typically get emotional about news stories such as this, because you become desensitized. You read about stuff like this every day, and, you do become desensitized. But, I shed a tear this morning watching that video. But then, as you mentioned,
I was numb, actually. I didn't shed a tear, but I felt absolutely numb.
Yeah, precisely, yeah. But then you mentioned radicalization, George.
Yeah.
Well, actually, following the helplessness I then felt anger. And, I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt this way. I did have thoughts of, what I would do to this person had I been put in a room alone with him. But then I realized that's exactly what people like him and people in the establishment want. They want a reaction like that. And all that does is perpetuate this violent circle of hatred. It might vindicate us in the short term, us meaning our Muslim community. But what it would do in the long term is it turn him into a martyr. And these people, did use him as an example. But, George, the issue is no one's really talking about the actual problem here. And people like him, they're just a symptom of a disease. And this disease is the institutionalized racism and Islamophobia in the political establishment and international media. I mean, like I said, George, I'm only 20 years old, but I can't bring myself to watch the news these days because every single day you read the news and you watch it, and they're always whipping up hatred against Muslims because they have to, of course. They have an active military campaign in the Middle East, and nobody wants to go to war with a civilized man. You have to portray your enemy as a barbarian or savage or something.
Yes. Well, I did. I did. First of all, for a 20-year-old man, you are tremendously eloquent,
Thank you.
And your arguments are very persuasive and noble, I may say. But I did say in the run-up to the Iraq war that you can't, if you pump out propaganda demonizing Muslim leaders, their people, by extension, their supporters, and so on, to the extent that we're going to have to go to war and kill hundreds of thousands of people. You can't do that without the demonization. You have to dehumanize your enemy in order to manufacture consent for endless war against them. I don't know about institutionalization, but racism it is. It is, of course, Islam is not a race, but most people who follow it are not white.
Precisely, George.
And so racism and sectarianism merge into one another. And of course, there have been many other targets of that kind of racism. I'm from an Irish background. I well remember when Irish people were demonized. Jewish people were demonized. If you look at the mass media at the early part of the 20th century, Jewish people were being described as almost as rats, jumping off ship. In fact, there were depictions of rats jumping off ships and headed for the English shore and so on. It's racism at the end of the day. It's therefore white supremacy. It is the racist idea that fortress whitehood is under unrelenting attack from subhumans who are just humans with a different, dare I use the word, tinge. That's all. That's the only difference.
Yeah. I mean, George, something I realized watching this video, rather than getting upset and angry, us as a community and, even general members of the public, we have to channel this energy into something productive. And the only way we can challenge the establishment, against things like Islamophobia, which create these sort of problems, is to become political.
You're absolutely right about that. To get involved in politics and democracy, that's the antidote to extremism and fanaticism.
I mean, we have to stop sitting idly by and assuming those people elected have our community's best interests at heart. I mean, following the news this morning, I actually ended up joining the Labour Party, and that may come as a surprise to some of the people feeling a bit disillusioned due to the recent Brexit woes over Labour. But you mentioned Tony Benn, and I'm aware it was his death anniversary yesterday. But just to briefly paraphrase him, something that he said that stuck out to me was pessimism leads to inactivity, and that's precisely what the people want. The establishment wants. They don't want people to rally together and campaign behind a cause, because if we all just sit there and just take the system for what it is, and never challenge it, then how will we ever change it?
Omar, I think we're going to be hearing more from you and about you. I really hope so. Omar in Rochdale. Let's go to Mohammed in Maidenhead. Always worth hearing. Mohammed, welcome, brother.
Good evening, George. How are you?
Well, it's been a difficult day, a difficult week.
It has been a difficult day, George. Yeah, this New Zealand incident. I haven't watched the video. I've taken your advice, George, and I
commend you not to watch it. It will darken your heart and your soul. It's not worth it. It's proof that Satan is alive and walking on the earth.
Yeah, George. Yeah, no. Satan is alive and walking on the earth. And to add to that, George, I just have an opinion that some people are just evil. I think that it's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem because you've got. Sorry, George, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm concurring with you. I don't like people saying that anyone who does that must be mad. That actually denies the existence of evil in the world. When there is it's abundantly clear that there is evil present in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the influence of the shaitan, of the devil, and then there's some people who are just evil in their hearts. And I've been doing a lot of, because recently, George, I've done a counselling course. So I've subscribed to a counselling course. It's only online, but I've been learning a lot of psychology. And one of the things they ignore in psychology is the influence of evilness, the influence of the devil, the influence of people's own hearts being evil. Freud talks about defense mechanisms, and a defense mechanism is a form of repression or denial used in unpleasant or painful situations to maintain peace of mind or tranquility. So I was trying to then look at the defense mechanisms. There's a list of 15 defense mechanisms that he describes, and none of them take into consideration of evil. And it's just for example, reaction formation is when somebody consciously believes something and then is contrary to what they unconsciously believe. But I think that that's what's happening with a lot of people that are actually speaking out about this. They're probably saying things consciously, but unconsciously they're believing other things. But it's just, George, the whole situation of what's happened in New Zealand is just really heartbreaking. And the previous caller said something very interesting. He said that we should be channeling our impulses into something more productive.
Yes, this was Omar in Rochdale. A lot of people are asking for his Twitter handle, by the way, which is Umar Malik 1998. That's UMARMALIK 1998. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yeah, so he was that. Actually, what he described is actually a defense mechanism called sublimation. It's when you channel impulses into more productive ways.
Yes.
And that would be a good defense mechanism to have. But obviously, I find that in psychology, in the intelligence, in the mainstream media, I saw in the news, they were advertising it as racist man does so-and-so. Why don't they write evil man does so-and-so? Why don't they take into consideration the evil that's in the world?
Well, a lot of criticism is that they keep saying shooting, rather than terrorist attack as they would in other circs. Thanks, Mohammed. I've got to press on because of the hour. Let's go to Frank and in Dumbarton. Go ahead, Frank.
Hi, George. How are you?
Yeah, good to hear from you. Go ahead.
George, it was just about that statement I read for that senator. It was horrible. See, we read the full statement.
Yes, I've got it in front of me. It's almost incredible, unbelievable that a senator in the wake of such a disaster could make that kind of a statement on official Australian Senate notepaper.
Yeah, I mean, headed notepaper was a lot. Yeah. It was pretty horrible. It's just that my father, he used to live and work in Australia, and my brother, he's got dual nationality, and he says that for years down there, they're quite racist in Australia, really to everybody.
Well, that's what our first guest, Peter Dobby, was saying, and I think he's right, that to a large extent, especially in politics and media, Phil Dobby, I beg your pardon, Phil made the point that in politics and media, they're still in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And I think he's right about that.
Yeah, that's what my father believes.
It's a bit ironic, given the genesis of Australia as a white colony. It was people like thee and me that were sent there in the holds of ships.
Yeah. That's right.
Frankie, thanks a lot, pal. Let's go to Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, hello, George. Good evening.
Evening, sir.
What a great show. You're doing very, very well,
Thank
George.
you, sir. Thank you.
I think you and Farage will put you up as the next leader, and you'd certainly make a better chancellor than the one we've got.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to take up this young fellow who came on this evening, Omar, and what he was saying about democracy. And I think, with respect, that you agreed with him. But do you not think democracy is dead if the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, and I was one of them, after voting for Blair for a lot of years, and then, wow, when I realised what he was up to, I said, no, I'm not being sucked in by this guy anymore. But democracy, do you think, George?
It's not dead yet, but they're trying to kill it. As you know, I agree entirely with you on the murder of Brexit, but we still have the vote. The question is, can we use it? Will we use it? Will we use it wisely? Or will we keep sending back the donkeys to bray and put their noses in the nosebag when they get there? We have the power, Richard, but we're being betrayed by a class of politicians and media, by the way, and we've got to change that on both counts. I'm doing my best on the media front, but we need to do it on the political front too.
Well, your programme and other programmes that are allowing us a voice has been the most enlightening thing that I've ever listened to in the last 5 years. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Richard. Now, I've set up, as you know, I've mentioned it before, the Brexit Alliance, and I'm going to be calling a meeting very soon. I do hope you'll try and come to that, and if you can't, then at least stay in touch with it, because the victory of ideals has to be organised, Richard. It doesn't. The apple just doesn't fall from the tree. You've got to shake the tree.
No, I believe in that. But when I've been watching this week in Parliament, where a young Labour MP stood up and virtually pleaded with the Prime Minister to her face, please, you've got to help me. My people are starving. You're kicking them out of the hotel because the Cruff show is on in Birmingham and putting them in rubbish hotels, and everybody's upset. They've got no food. This thing is not working. This what do you call it? Where they go to used to be called the dole office, and Social
Security. Yeah, no, the DWP system is breaking down.
universal credit is absolutely
in front of our eyes. But this is why people voted in the way that they did at Brexit. You know, the comfortable soft shoe shufflers, the Waitrose Brigade, the FBPE and all that, they have no idea of the fact that 17.4 million people, the vast majority of them anyway, took a look around themselves, took a look around at their own lives, their own economic situation, their own lack of hope that it's going to get better, and they said, well, if this is your EU, we don't want it.
Yes. But if you follow the money in this last 2.5 years, it all comes back to the Blairites, and he's now trying to get the Tiggers or whatever the stupid name they've got.
Richard, it literally drives me to distraction.
Yeah.
That a man who ought to be in The Hague facing crimes against humanity and war crimes is instead sitting right back at the top of the heap on every news bulletin in every newspaper, sitting at Davos, sitting at Munich, sitting at with Macron, advising Macron on how he could turn over the results of the British referendum. It's just incredible to me that a man that should be, in my view, behind bars is in fact calling the shots.
I agree. And it drives me crazy as well, George. I'm sitting back listening to him after hearing, yes, I'm going to stop Brexit. I heard somebody on your programme today from Belfast, where I have relations, and, he was screaming, what the... I won't repeat the word. What is it doing? What is this man? He's nothing to do with us anymore. No. And yet here he is using Soros money to go over there and to virtually kick democracy in touch. And that's why I rang you tonight, because I thought democracy is dead now.
No, it's not dead yet. Don't give up, Richard. Thanks very much for the call. It's only dead if we allow it to die. You're not finally defeated until you surrender. You're not finally defeated until God gives you no more breath, and then what matters is who comes forth to take your place. So no, it's not dead, but there are people trying to kill it, and it will only be killed if we allow that to be so. Thanks very much for that call. Let me read some of the messages. Wayne Mack for Palestine says, your caller's on the right track, George. David Steele was interviewed on Sky News after the recent airing of the documentary on Thorpe. He said then, when pressed, that he'd no memory at all of Thorpe's discretions, indiscretions, or any other. Well, I think he stunned the Liberal Democrats. That's why they suspended him. He stunned them by the total insouciance with which he dealt with the questioning in the inquiry. I don't know if he's losing his touch or whatever, but for a politician to say that he had known all along that Cyril Smith had confessed to him that he'd been committing sexual crimes against children, children in an orphanage, and he didn't think that he ought to report that to anybody. In fact, even worse, he went on to recommend that man to the Queen as a knight. Damien says, scary parallel going on over here, George, along with Boris Johnson's remarks about the waste of money investigating historical abuse. Are they trying to protect the establishment? I mean, he's another one. I just could not believe my ears, especially when I looked it up in the dictionary of the meaning of the word that he'd used. So filthy I don't want to say it. Boris Johnson, has he got a death wish? I mean, he looked like he was going to be the next Prime Minister at one stage. Has he got a death wish? David says, people need to get real and wake up. You can be part of the problem or part of the solution. We all share this fragile planet. Fra says, did this killer have any military experience or a military career in the armed forces? Fascism is rife among some quarters of the military establishment. Remember the German military man who was planning an airport false flag attack. And Amin in London says, watching Crosstalk with Gigi and trying to listen to the mother of all talk shows at the same time. Good job, sir. Thank you very much indeed for that. Time for one more, I think. Colin Goodale says, hearing the pompous DUP kingmakers wax lyrical on their newfound importance amplifies the own goal the UK has delivered the electorate. The moment these Luddites ensnared the process, it was always going to end one way. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, come back next week at the same time in the same place here on Talk Radio.